Peter Schweizer is with us now, head of the Government Accountability Institute and the author of Red Handed and the co-host now of The Drill Down. Welcome, Peter. How are you?
I'm great, Glenn. Always good to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So let's start with the Biden crime family stuff. You're following, I'm sure, what's happening in Congress. And they keep coming out. Every day I see something new. Oh, man, we just got some evidence. Oh, look out, we got them now. Should I even pay attention to that, Peter? Is something going to be done?
Well, I think you should pay attention to it. Look, what I would say, Glenn, is let's look back at how far we've come. We first exposed the China deals that the Bidens had, the extent of the Ukraine deals. Back in 2018, I came on your show. We talked about it extensively on your podcast. We were voices crying in the wilderness. The Bidens at that point were saying, there's no deals in China. What are they talking about? We're at a stage now where they've had to admit, yes, okay, there were deals. Then the laptop emerged and people realized, okay, Joe Biden was actually involved. There was communication. And then we are now at the point where, as I exposed in Red Handed, and again, you were really the tip of the spear in exposing it, who was actually giving money to the Bidens. So I am encouraged by what I'm seeing. But look, here's the key thing. The leaders in Washington, I think, want to think there's going to be a legal bullet that's going to fix this. There's going to be some crime that they're going to find. That's not what this case is ultimately about. What this case is ultimately about, in my mind, is about espionage, because it's about who gave these tens of millions of dollars of money to the Bidens. They don't dispute that they got the money. The three people that got them the money have links to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. And so this is not going to be resolved ultimately by some prosecutor saying, oh, we found some technical crime that we're going to get the Bidens on. It's going to take Congress and Capitol Hill holding the family into account for the money they were receiving, who they were receiving it from, and that's going to be the solution. So we need to make sure that our political leaders are doing that and not just outsourcing this and hoping that some lawyer is going to do something about it.
Now let's go to Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the dirtiest countries far as money laundering and everything else in the world. And we have had everyone from George Soros, Barack Obama's people, Joe Biden's family, the Clintons. Everyone is involved in this that's shady. And now we're going to war and we're sending them billions and billions of dollars, and there's no oversight.
Yeah.
Is this really just nothing more than a money laundering scheme?
Well, yeah, I'm very concerned about the way in which the aid is being sent to Ukraine. You and I know, both grieve for the Ukrainian people. We support the Ukrainian people. The problem is Ukraine is led by this corrupt government. I mean, let's remember Zelensky's chief financial backer, it's not even close,
right,
is a oligarch named Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is known to have ripped off billions of dollars of foreign aid in the past.
Right.
There was something called Privat Bank that got money from the IMF, from the United States, and from Europe.
Wasn't it like $7 billion or something like that? It was an extraordinary amount.
Yeah, and it basically disappeared.
Correct.
And one of the things that emerged was that all these LLCs had been established that siphoned all the money off. So that's who Zelensky is. So obviously there are Ukrainians fighting bravely for their country, but you have this cast of characters at the top of Ukraine, and then you have Americans who are making decisions, have been involved in leadership here, who have their hand in the trough and have had their hand in the trough not just in Ukraine, but in Russia and with Vladimir Putin. I mean, let's remember 10 years ago, the Clintons, John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, counselor at the State Department, were all doing business with Vladimir Putin. He had already invaded Georgia back in 2008. They didn't care. They were taking money from oligarchs and people in Russia and Ukraine. So it is very hard not to look at this and say that there is a financial corruption component to this. And all the people now who want to make Zelenskyy the Thomas Jefferson of Central Europe have been getting rich off of people from both sides. The Clintons took money from Ukrainian oligarchs. They took money from Russian oligarchs. So the entanglements are there, and to pretend that that didn't happen, that sordid part of this history didn't happen, is not being accurate as to what's really going on.
John Podesta has an energy company, and he got a $40 million investment from Putin's personal government investment fund, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. This is it. The company is called Juul Energy. He joined the board of Juul Energy, back, I think it was 2012, 2013. Within a couple of months, they got a $40 million investment from Rusnano, which is a sovereign wealth fund that was called Putin's Child by one of the Russian ministers. This was Vladimir Putin's investment fund. He was happy to take that money, John Podesta was. When he then went and worked for Barack Obama in the second term, and the Wall Street Journal's reported on this, James Freeman did, what basically happened was he tried to hide that asset. He took his ownership stake in the energy company and gave it to one of his adult daughters to try to mask the fact that these assets were being held. You look at Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, again, already Vladimir Putin had already invaded Georgia. She said, we're going to come up with this scheme as Secretary of State called Skolkovo. And this was to create a Russian version of Silicon Valley. We're going to get all these big tech companies to go and invest in Russia. What could go wrong, Glenn? Well, what went wrong is, among other things, the Pentagon under Barack Obama later said because of Skolkovo, Russia was able to get the technology for this hypersonic missile, which they have now been using in Ukraine. And of course, Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation collected money from the people who were running Skolkovo in Russia. They actually donated to the Clinton Foundation. So, I mean, this is all in black and white. This is not speculation. We've reported on this. You and I have talked a little bit about this in the past. And nobody in Washington, official Washington, wants to bring this up. If you discuss these things, you're somehow undermining the Ukrainian cause. No, you're not. You're showing that the Ukrainian people have been victims not only of Vladimir Putin, but of the aggressive financial actions of elites in the United States as well.
So, when we first got into this, I thought the cynical part of me immediately went to they are destroying evidence. They did so much dirty stuff over there. They're paying people off and destroying evidence. I don't know if that's true, other than the labs that Hunter Biden was involved in. But the money seems to me to be some sort of a payoff, money laundering. Do you think we're going to be able to track this ever and see if any of that money came back to people here in the United States?
I think it'll be hard to do. Certainly, we're going to do that, and I know you and your team are going to try to trace that. But, I mean, here's really the problem in the nutshell as far as I'm concerned. I am in support of providing, food supplies, even some military supplies to the Ukrainian people. What I don't want is these blank checks, these tens of billions of dollars in cash that are basically being dumped into Ukraine, where you're going to have Zelenskyy and, of course, his chief financial backer, Kolomoisky, and these other Ukrainian oligarchs that have donated to the Clintons, like Viktor Pinchuk and others. I don't want them handling that money. And, of course, they are going to be handling that money. It's going to be going through their companies and their entities. That, to me, is a huge problem. The way you make sure that the Ukraine story never gets reported in terms of what was going on, the people that were doing deals there, the corrupt deals. The way you make sure that story doesn't get out is you continue to pay the leaders of Ukraine and provide them with financial support. If you end that, that's when you are at risk. So
it's blackmail.
In my mind, there's no question. Yeah, there's no question that is got to be some motivation as to what's going on.
Why was Randy Weingarten and Janet Yellen there?
I don't know if they're planning to change the Ukrainian school curriculum. I certainly hope not. But yeah, it's again demonstrates that Randy Weingarten is a political figure. She's not ultimately a teacher, an advocate for teachers. But again, this is part of the network because it's government money, but it's also NGOs and nonprofits. These are organizations like the Clinton Foundation that Randy Weingarten has given lots of money to, and as head of American Federation of Teachers has done work with. They have received large sums of money to do various projects in Ukraine. And again, there's no accountability for that. We think about government corruption and taxpayer money, but there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that receive money, sometimes from governments, to carry out projects in countries like Ukraine. It's really in my mind, a very cynical takeoff of the old Rahm Emanuel line about never let a crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
That applies to global crises as well. That applies to war zones, unfortunately. And to see Randy Weingarten there, provides no positive basis for anything good to be happening in Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned.
So, Peter, tell me about the Republicans. Do we have Republicans dirty in Ukraine as well that would want to stop the investigation on this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are. I think the reason that there's so much focus on, for example, the Clintons and the Bidens is because they made obvious and clear efforts early on to stake out claim in Ukraine. And it really is one of the ultimate ironies, right? When you think about it, that, the quote unquote biggest advocates for Ukraine and Ukraine independence have been people like the Bidens, ostensibly. And yet, Vladimir Putin chose two occasions to go into Ukraine. One time in 2014 when he moved into Crimea, which, of course, was the Obama-Biden administration. Then he skipped the Trump administration. And when Joe Biden became president of the United States, he decided to move in again, which is really strange when you think about it, because Biden has sort of thumped his chest that I have been such a staunch supporter of Ukraine and Ukraine independence. And yet when he has been at the highest rungs of power, that's when Vladimir Putin has been the most aggressive. So he sees weakness there. But to answer your question, yes, I'm sure that there are Republican political consultants that have gotten, NGO grants to do sort of nation building work in Ukraine. The problem is that those efforts, of course, always go through the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian political parties. And when you look at the span there's not a lot of clean hands in any of the political parties there.
So John Podesta's brother, Tony Podesta, was over in Ukraine, did some really, I think, some dirty stuff. All of a sudden just disappeared. He just went away. I'm closing shop. Literally overnight. I'm shutting it all down.
Yeah.
Then when Biden got into office, he opened shop again. Is he involved in Ukraine again?
I don't know if he is again, but he certainly was before. And let's remember Tony Podesta, of course, his brother John, Podesta ran the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. Tony Podesta was a lobbyist who did an enormous amount of work with foreign clients, some of them Russian, some of them Chinese, some of them Ukrainian, a veritable United Nations of clients. And he never registered as a foreign agent under the so-called FARA Act,
right?
Which is, of course, what they went after, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, for failing to file.
Right.
Podesta retroactively filed, I think, 30 filings for clients after they went after Paul Manafort. They never went after John Podesta, Department of Justice.
What a surprise.
In my mind, I'm glad that they went after Manafort for FARA violations. We need to enforce that, but you've got to be consistent. You've got to be consistent. It seems like they never are.
Real quick, and I know this is kind of out of your expertise, but I know you know a lot about Putin. Are we headed towards war?
I think we are headed towards war, and I think here's the problem. Vladimir Putin has sort of put all his chips on the table in Ukraine. You have to give him some way to save face. Yeah, if you say unconditional surrender, that to me is a recipe to escalation. And this is the kind of man who would start using battlefield nuclear weapons. And once that happens, God help us all. So you have got to have some kind of a negotiated settlement that protects Ukraine, protects the Ukrainian people, but also gives Vladimir Putin something. The problem is that's not Joe Biden's strategy. Joe Biden thinks he's FDR fighting Hitler. Hitler, of course, did not have nuclear weapons. It's a totally different world we live in.
Yeah, and we also had a plan after Hitler, too, where we're just saying, you know what, the next guy will probably be better. The guys standing in the wings do not look better by far. Peter Schweizer, thank you so much. You can listen to his podcast. It's called The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
The Glenn Beck Program.